Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to welcome you to the session Publishing in Educational Management Administration and Leadership. Today, we again have the privilege of hosting Professor Tony Bush, a luminary in educational leadership. With his vast experience as Professor of Educational Leadership at Nottingham and as President of British Educational Leadership Society, Belfast, and as Editor-in-Chief of EMAL, Professor Bush brings invaluable insights to our gathering. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor Tony Bush as we eagerly anticipate his enlightening discourse. Thank you. Değerli A4 katılımcıları, İMAL Dergisi yayın süreçleri oturumuna hoş geldiniz. Bugün tekrar eğitim liderliğinde bir duayen olan Profesör Tony Bush'u ağırlayacağız. İngiltere Nottingham'da eğitim liderliği profesörü olarak büyük deneyime sahip olan ve British Educational Leadership Society, BELMAS Başkanı ve ayrıca EMAL Baş Editörü olarak görev yapan Profesör Bush'u değerli bilgileriyle bize katkı sunması için kürsüye davet ediyorum. Teşekkür ederim.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session. This is not so much a presentation as a conversation. And so I'm inviting the very shy people in the audience at the back to move to the front. And I can tell you from personal experience, the chairs at the front are very comfortable. So I do invite you to move towards the front so we can have a conversation. It's not just a presentation. So far I'm having no success. One person has moved, thank you. Please do move towards the front so we can make this more interactive and have more of a conversation than before. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to repeat my thanks to the organisers of the Congress for giving me the opportunity to be here, my very first visit to Turkey. I hope it won't be my last visit to Turkey. And today I'm going to be speaking about my baby, the journal My Baby, that I've been editor for a long time. But I also want this to be very helpful for you. I assume that many people in the audience are here because they're interested in publishing on educational administration, or they're already doing it. I've already met some people in the audience who have had articles accepted by email, and indeed people are also very helpfully refereeing and reviewing for email. So I take my opportunity to thank them very much as valued members of the BELMAS and email family. So let us make a start. So first of all, a little bit of biography to follow up on what's already been said in relation to this. I've been editor-in-chief for 21 years, right, which is remarkable when you think about it. And I'll let you into a little secret. When I was interviewed for the position with three very, very good academics, I was lucky to get the position. I was offered the position for a period of 4 years. Now, you will work out that somehow I've extended my stay as editor for 17 years beyond the 4 that I was given in my initial contract. So it's my privilege to have that opportunity to lead the journal for that period of time. I'm also, as many people are, I'm a reviewer for many major journals in leadership and similar subjects. I've accepted an invitation to review this morning from a journal, not my own, another journal. But that also gives you another perspective as an editor, to have a reviewer role. And of course, I'm also an author as well. I'm moving towards my target of 100 journal article publications. A few more to go before I get to that point. So I have the perspective of author, reviewer, and of course an experienced editor as well. The other thing that I do a lot is co-publish. So I offer all my PhD students when they graduate the opportunity to publish with me. And so as a result, it's a good starting point for early career researchers to co-publish with a more experienced person. And I do encourage those of you who would self-define as early career researchers to take that opportunity to publish alongside a more experienced colleague, perhaps your supervisor or a mentor. It's a good way forward. So what do we talk about international? What do we mean by international? International journals generally means English language journals. For those of you who know this field of education administration very well, will be aware that all the major international journals are published in English. And I know that can be a challenge for authors whose first language is Turkish or indeed any other language, not English. So we know that's a challenge. The strategy that we have in email is to welcome submissions from every country. I was telling colleagues last night that in the last 12 months we have received submissions to email from 77 countries on all 6 continents. And we are delighted about that. And as you will have seen yesterday, scholars from Turkey are important contributors to the journal, and that's one of the reasons why I accepted the invitation to come here. So let me pause there. I'm going to pause after each set of slides. Any questions or comments on what I've said so far? You know, I never thought Turkish people were shy. Are you shy, Turkish people? You don't need to be shy. Or maybe you save your questions for later. But I would like it to be interactive. One way in which I can know I'm doing something of value to you is for you to ask me something, or to agree with me, or disagree with me. That's also fine. Disagreement is normal in the academic world. But in the meanwhile, I'll go on. I hope you don't disappoint me the next time I pause. So I'm going to, because you're here, I'm assuming that you know already that journal publishing matters. It's important. And although there are lots of other ways in which we can publish our work, for example, writing books or contributing book chapters to edited volumes, journal publishing, certainly in good journals, is more important because it has the most robust review process. Very thorough review processes. And that gives the reader and others more confidence that the quality will be good. I'll say more about that a little bit later. So certainly for PGRs, for PhD students, early career researchers, you reach a wider audience. So all search engines will feature the major journals. They may not always get book chapters, for example, in those search engines. So how are you going to become famous? So people can search and they find your article. Then you become famous. That's very important. I'll say more about discoverability of articles a little bit later on. And you have an obligation to disseminate. I do tell my students off, the ones that don't go on and write articles afterwards. So I know I've spoken to some people here who are doing their PhDs. Your PhD is not a destination. It's part of your journey as a scholar. Don't think of it as a destination. Think of it as part of the journey as you go along. So I've mentioned the accessibility already, and in conversations here and in many other places, increasingly universities and even governments are pressurizing academics to publish in good journals to develop their career. We had that conversation yesterday with some colleagues. So to have your position confirmed, to get through a probation period, to be promoted, often the requirement develops around journal publication. What that provides is a very clear, explicit motivation for publication. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that is not enough. If that's your only motivation, I'm very disappointed in you. I want to think people contribute to the knowledge base in the world. Don't be narrow. I need it for my promotion. And I said yesterday, I sometimes get people writing to me and saying, oh, will you please publish my article? I need it for my promotion. So how do you think I'm going to respond to that? The criteria for publication in my journal does not include your need for promotion. It's about quality. It has to be about quality. And motivation that goes beyond, I need it for my promotion or whatever, beyond that. And most of you will be aware of the lots of university rankings now, global university rankings. The QS rankings from Shanghai are the most well known. Research outputs are very, very important in that process. So my own university, for example, Nottingham, is ranked 47th in the world in the education QS rankings. And there are 10,000 universities included. So that's good, but there's only one place to be really, and that's number one, right? Am I right? Have to be the best. Okay, let me pause. Anything more about motivation? I had some conversations with people yesterday about this. So, why are you interested in publishing? Does anybody want to tell me? And the audience? Recognition, that's a very, yeah. Yeah, very good, recognition. Who knows you? One of the issues around publishing in international journals is the world will come to know your work. If you publish in a Turkish language journal, then other people in Turkey will get to know your work. So it's about do you want a global reach? I think that's an important consideration for you. Or how do you become better known is a key question. Okay, let's go on to selecting your journal. So although I'm drawing on my experience as editor-in-chief of Email, a lot of what I'm going to say is relevant to publishing in any journal. One of the challenges of very, very highly ranked journals, Q1 in relation to the Email, is the acceptance rate is low. So when I checked the acceptance rate before leaving to come here, current acceptance rate is 9.5%. So I do say to people sometimes, oh, I want to publish in your journal because it's Q1. Right. Yes, very good. But would you be better off targeting a less prestigious journal where the acceptance rate may be higher? So that's a strategic decision for the author. Of course, you can still submit to a highly ranked journal, receive comments back from the reviewers. That is free advice, by the way. That's priceless, free advice. Develop it and then send it to another journal. Don't give up. Don't give up. You have to be very tenacious and persistent in developing that work. Now, a little warning here, and it's something that has worried me over the last few months. You'll all be aware there are open access journals where the author pays. Something called author payment charges, APCs. You'll be very familiar with those folks, of course. APCs. Now, some of these are perfectly respectable, and the funding model is the author pays. For most well-established journals like mine, the model is a subscription model. The author does not pay. So more than 2,000 universities around the world subscribe to Email. So they are paying, so you can publish for free. Right? Good deal, yeah? Is that a good deal? It's a good deal. But there are lots of open access. Some of these open access processes are scams. Can anyone translate scam for me into Turkish, just in case you don't understand the English? And scams, they're not real. So several authors have contacted me recently, yes, over the last year or so, to say, I've had my article published by Email, accepted by Email, and I've paid my $500 US, but I can't see it published on your website. So someone has pretended to be me, told them their article is accepted, told them it's 500 US or sometimes more, and the money has been stolen from the author. So I would encourage all of you, especially less experienced, to be very careful. If you're not sure, email the editor of the journal in concern. And most of the top journals do not charge for publication. But some very unfortunate people, often from developing contexts, have been robbed. So I'd hate to see that happen to anybody in this room. Okay, I've mentioned already this issue about how ambitious to be. So if you're a first-time author, never published in a journal before, do you start at the top, or do you adopt a more cautious approach? So for example, Belmas has 2 journals, mine and also a journal called Management in Education, where the acceptance rate is quite a bit higher. My good friend Paul Armstrong is the editor-in-chief. He's just finished the Boston Marathon, by the way. Anyone into running here? Boston Marathon, right? So in the Boston Marathon, the 21 miles, there is something called Heartbreak Hill. Have you heard of Heartbreak Hill? It's a bit like what happens when you send your journal article in and it's rejected. Then you've reached Heartbreak Hill. Anyway, there you are. So you can think in terms of a different journal, but be careful of the scans. Any comments or questions at this point? Have you all woken up this morning and made a vow of silence? This is all because you're all so young. There was a track a few years ago, which, very interesting track, Silence is Golden. Does anyone know that track? I won't sing it because that leads to everybody leaving the room. Silence is golden. It's not golden when we're trying to have a conversation. So, let me tell you about the submission process. And this is specific to email, but it is true for most journals. You submit through a website called Manuscript Central. And the only difference between my journal and others is the last part, EMAL. The other, www.mscmanuscriptcentral.com, is the same for many, many journals. So you can it even helps you to choose which journal you're going to go for. So most use the same platform. So in relation to email, when the submission process, you have to first of all register, then you submit, and the article appears in the mailbox of my administrator, whose name is Louise. She's been the administrator for this journal for 20 years. That's nearly the whole time that I've been editor-in-chief. She's very, very good. And I must be kind to her because she's lasted 20 years, right? 20 years with me, my wife would say 20 years with me is too much for anyone. But anyway, we'll take that as a point. So what happens then is Louise gives every submission a number. So it'd be email 2024, and the next number I think is 276. So you get a number. It's a unique identifier number, personal to you. Okay? And the articles must be under 8,000 words. If they're over 8,000 words, what happens? Louise sends them back to you. I don't even see them. Separate mailboxes on the system. She sends them back. And I do get messages sometimes from authors. I know your limit is 8,000 words. My manuscript is 9,500. Can you make an exception? Now, those of you who've met me know I'm a kind person. Is that correct? Nobody's saying you must be joking. Right? So my answer to them is there are no exceptions. And writing to a length requirement is an academic skill. Is it not? Writing to a length requirement is an academic skill. So don't ask for special pleading. Then I say, no, you can't. Why did we do that? So back in the day when We had limited capacity, and we had print versions of the journal. We still have print versions now, but you have to pay for them. We had limited capacity. So we made a decision as an editorial board to limit the length of 8,000 words so we could include more articles in each issue of the journal. Does that make sense? Well, that's why we did it. So we've kept to that. And I think it's possible for people to argue, make their arguments and present their data and discuss it within that limit. It's a challenge. Some people say, oh, I can't do it, I can't get it down to 8,000 words because my thesis is 100,000 words. My answer is very simple. It's a different animal. It's a different output. And the worst thing you can do, I say to my own PhD students, is to cut and paste your thesis. Do not cut and paste your thesis. Think of the thesis as a resource from which you can develop an article. That's very different. Okay. So then they come to me. Now, I work closely with Deputy Editor Professor Megan Crawford, and Megan looks after some parts of the world. So this doesn't apply to you, I guess, but Megan looks after UK, USA, Canada, Caribbean, and Latin America. So if an article comes into email from authors in those countries, Louise will send them to Megan's mailbox. If they come from anywhere else in the world, she sends them to my mailbox. So Turkish submissions will come to my mailbox. Now you may think, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing that it comes to me? But that's the way we work it at the moment. We have an editorial board meeting next week. We're reviewing that process, but that's what we do at the moment. Okay, now I'm going to have to be very honest with you at this stage. Although I am Mr. Nice Guy, are we agreed on that? One person says yes, that's better than nobody saying yes, right? I do reject quite a lot of submissions at the editorial desk. In other words, they don't get sent for review. So a big challenge for the author, when I'm talking in smaller groups, I say to them all, your first target is to get past me. So some basics then, some basics. Does your article fit the scope of the journal? You'd be amazed. I've said this to some people already. At the topics I received so recently, I've had one about leadership in engineering. Now the clue is in the title of the journal, right? Educational, management, administration, leadership. This is not rocket science. And I'm getting stuff about engineering. I get stuff about nursing. I get stuff about business. You know what? That makes my life really easy. Do you know why? I can press the reject button very quickly. So if you're writing about that, don't send it. Select your journal. I sometimes think, how did they choose my journal when it's engineering? I think, well, maybe they've got to E in their list of journals, right? And at least it starts with the same letter. But it's just amazing, and this is quite true, and it happens quite often. So sometimes they're rejected because they don't fit the scope. So either they're not about education, or they're not about management, administration, and leadership. Now here we have an interesting issue, don't we, Box Out as editors. There's that issue of definition, which we talked about a little bit yesterday, and which I talked about with the group last evening, where we had a debate and didn't really reach agreement. That's okay, we don't have to reach agreement. But it does make that difference. Does it fit the scope of the journal? And I'm very conscious, Cox, of your very important question yesterday about how much the editor defines it. By saying yes in some situations and no in others. And that is an issue that we need to reflect on, all of us involved in that process. So, if it doesn't fit the journal scope, we don't accept it. Now here are some other things. People haven't bothered to proofread their manuscript before submitting it. Basics. Typos everywhere. Bad grammar. I know it's difficult if you're a second language speaker, so get some help before you submit. Because we don't say, oh, don't worry, these are second language speakers, so they don't need to reach the same standard. They still do. So that's really important. So the presentation might be weak. Are we getting adequate methods? People don't explain their methods properly. So one of my things you should be careful about this, I get people saying to me, I decided to do purposive sampling. Guess you're all familiar with purposive sampling? Yes? Fine. But then they don't tell the reader what the purpose is. Purposive? So what's the purpose? They don't tell the reader. So you get all sorts of weaknesses like that that come into it, and very important to avoid it. Sometimes no systematic literature review, in some cases no literature review at all. Right? Interesting question for you all, scholars and practitioners in the world of educational administration. Why do we need a literature review? Very good answer. And thank you for being here, because I think you're the only person with a voice today. But it's, yes, because we need to know what is it that the article is going to contribute to what the world knows already about your topic. What is it going to add? And so two things really. You're showing the reader that you understand the field to which you are hoping to make a contribution. And secondly, when you come towards the end of the article in the discussion or the conclusion, you have to compare your findings with previous research. If you don't do that, there's another opportunity for me to put it in the electronic waste paper basket. Am I frightening everybody now? Don't mean to. Okay. Make connections between your data and your literature. Make connections. This research is significant, it contributes to the field because it confirms what this person has said, provides a different perspective from what this person has said, and that may be because of a different context. For example, previous research was conducted in Mexico, my research was done in Turkey, and that may explain the difference. But you've got to engage. You see what I mean by engaging? Not just presenting, engaging. To be published in the top journals, really. Okay, careful paper preparation is required. You know something, I met a lot of interesting people in my few days here so far, and it confirms what I always think is true in life as well as in journal publishing. First impressions count, don't they? So you can make up your mind quite quickly about whether someone's a nice person or not. Someone you like to meet again or not. Someone you'd like to take out for a drink or not. Right. The first impressions count very much. Make the editor your friend. But don't give up. Do not give up. Lots of people give up, and that can be a problem. Let me pause. Any more? I have one friend who's found her voice. Any comments or questions from anyone else? Thank you, Oxford. I'm so glad you're here. Go ahead. Do you need a microphone?
I think I can speak up. What is the special function of cover letter in your journal?
Sorry, special function of the cover letter.
Cover letter.
I don't think it really has a special. I think it's more of an introduction.
Do you read?
I think it's. I think
cover letters.
A cover letter doesn't reach me as an editor. It would be handled by the administrator. So I don't think it's particularly important. Where it is important, and maybe you've got this in mind, is when you receive a revisions outcome and you go away and you provide a resubmission, so you revise your article to address the comments of the reviewers, then the letter is very important, because that's where you can show the editor how you've responded, you know this, how you've responded to the comments of the reviewers. So I think it's important at second submission. First submission, I think it's a bit of a formality, really. Don't think it's a major issue. But thank you for the question. Okay, let's... Good.
Do you provide any help or feedback to fix the errors when you reject the article? Do you help them, or do you provide any feedback on fixing errors?
No, it's a very good question. Thank you very much for asking. So when we send out well, I'll say this a little bit later. There are 4 possible outcomes to the first submission. One is accept. I'll say this later. Now, that's in the whole of the 21 years in which I have been editor-in-chief of Email, how many articles received an accept on their first submission? Take a guess. So that's 21 years, let's call that 5,000 articles. How many received an accept on the first submission? I heard a number. Give a number. 40. You're close, it's 4. Only 4 have been accepted without any changes. 2 of them were from the same author. So it's extremely rare.
What is his other name?
Professor Tim Simpkins. So it's extremely rare. And in my own publishing career, I've only had acceptances without any revisions on 5 occasions out of 90 plus. So revisions are normal, okay? So let's make that point first of all. It's normal. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It's normal. So to answer your question, if you receive a minor revision or a major revision outcome, they're very common outcomes, then you will see the reviewer's comments are sent to you on an anonymous basis. So typically we would have 2 or 3 reviewers. You receive their comments. They're anonymous. You don't know who they are. They don't know who you are either. It's like a double-blind date, right? You don't know who you're going out with. So it's you get all that information. In addition, the editor will often make some additional comments as well in the letter. So you receive a letter to explaining the outcome. So there's that feedback. But I think what you may be asking for is more personal support. We can't do that. Reason, because we're reaching 700 submissions a year.
Not personal, but giving an opportunity to revise it.
Oh yes, that's what a major revision or a minor revision is. It's an invitation to you to revise, and in doing so, to take account of the comments of the reviewers.
That's very nice. Thank you for answering that.
It's good practice. Many journals do the same thing. It's good practice. Thank you for the question. Good question. Okay, let's move on. Is this not working?
Is working.
Oh. Hello, did I do that?
One more question.
Okay, well, I saw someone over there. Oh, I saw 2 people over there. We're getting going now, finally. So take the lady in front and then the lady in the red dress second. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said first impression matters.
Yeah, in life and in publishing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that mean that in our second attempt, our article will deal with suspicion?
No. No submission. No, I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. I apologise. So what we're looking for with a second submission is what I call serious engagement with the comments of the reviewers. By which I mean a systematic response. So if the reviewer says there are 5 things that need to change here, I expect the author to respond to all 5. You don't have to agree with all 5, actually, because it's your article, not theirs, but you still have to engage with it. And usually you look at the comment and you think, you know what, that's good advice. That's what usually happens. So you have to make that engagement. So no, first impressions count in relation to the article's first judgment. After that, you will find that sometimes reviewers will say, this author has not engaged seriously with my comments. That's a very bad mistake for the author. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, do you want to pass that back to the lady behind you?
I would like to, first of all, I'm so sorry for my voice, because I've literally lost my voice today.
That's bad timing. No, there's never good timing to lose your voice, but that's bad timing. Please go ahead with your question.
I would like to ask you about the desk rejection process, because for me, like authors, I've had my desk rejection serious, actually.
Yeah.
For example, my paper is about higher education, so I'm sending to higher education journals, big journals.
Yep.
And they just reject because of this is not suitable for our journal, or this is not our scope.
Yep.
But of course, what I would do is first of all to review the aims and scope process, so I know it's in the scope. I'm sure about it, but editors never gave me any feedback, just saying that this is not suitable for our journal because of the scope. So, what should we do about that?
Well, I'd like to say to you, first of all, I don't do that.
Thank you. It's good to know.
I don't do that. Authors are entitled to respect and to have an understanding of why the article doesn't fit the scope. But there is another challenge, and here I have to whisper to you, this is just for you. Right? Sometimes the written aims and scope don't match current policy. Right? Because policy in my journal, I guess it's the same with many, is developed by the editorial board that meets twice a year, but we've made some changes. So we've had to narrow the scope for email. But when I became editor, we had 40 submissions a year. We now have 700. We've had to narrow the scope.
Yes, of course.
And I think that's a challenge. But I think there needs to be if the answer is it doesn't fit the scope, then I say why not, why it doesn't. So to give you go back to the engineering example, I say it doesn't fit the scope because it's not about education, it's not about management, it's not about administration, it's not about leadership. I mean, it's an exceptionally stupid author, actually, isn't it? Most people are nearer than that, closer than that. But I do think that's an issue. And one of the things I'd like to say to people about who get desk rejects, it's very important to understand the rejection is of your article. It's not of you, the person. Sometimes that can be hard to understand. But it's of your piece of work, not you, the person. So I do think that's challenging, but it's a very good question, and I'm sorry you've had some disappointments in that respect. Did I see another hand somewhere? Oh, no more hands. Okay. So let's go on then, shall we? So the review process, I've mentioned some of this already in answering questions, but just to say what happens. So if you pass the editor's initial screening, you don't get a desk reject, okay? So first thing, that's a time to celebrate, okay? That's a good result. You've beaten the editor. And then they're sent for review. And so what I look for here is someone with an understanding of the specific topic that interests you, and also someone who understands your context. So typically, Turkish scholars, I won't know this, would find that one of the reviewers would be a Turkish scholar. Because there are contextual issues that are important. But it also then depends on your topic. We'd have, so I'm using examples later. If it's about instructional leadership, I will look for someone who's good on instructional leadership. And that could be from any country. So we're trying to get people who understand what you're writing about. That's the first thing to say. So we asked them to return their reviews within 2 weeks. I was discussing with some colleagues yesterday. One of our targets is to be the fastest responders in the world. And we're pretty good. Pretty good, but of course we can only be good because the reviewers are helpful to us. And it's a good opportunity for me to thank those reviewers who are in the room for their work. So we ask them to return within 2 weeks. The average is probably about 30 days. And do you know what really frustrates me? Do you really need to know about my frustrations on a Friday morning? Okay? Is the person who says they're going to send a review and never do. Right? Promises, but they don't deliver. And I send them polite messages, and then eventually I have to drop them and ask someone else, and that does make the process longer. So that can be a bit frustrating for everyone, for the editor as well as for the author, of course. Okay, so about 30 days, and they're anonymous, I've mentioned that already. They don't know who you are. So it's not personal to you. It's not, I can't stand that person, I'm not going to agree to their journal article being published. It's nothing to do with that. And you don't know who they are, so they can be honest and open and not worry about offending you. Okay, I think we've covered all of that. Is there anything about that that needs questions? Okay, we've done that already. So let's go on to look at mention the 2 or 3 referees. Not subject knowledge or contextual knowledge, anonymous. Referees are unpaid. This is sometimes understood, not understood by authors. So people are giving you their time and expertise voluntarily because they want to contribute to the scholarly community. So it's really important to bear that in mind if you're getting a bit frustrated. In my case, if I feel the delay is too long, I will send a personal message to the author to say, I'm sorry there's been a delay, I'm waiting for a review from one reviewer. So people are kept, they're not left wondering. Unlike a journal article I've sent to another well-known journal 9 months ago with my PhD student, for which we have received no reply. None. That's a disgrace, and I wrote recently to the editor to tell him it's a disgrace. That probably didn't improve our chances of getting it published, I have to say. But sometimes you have to say it as it is. So patience, very important. Would you all describe yourselves as patient people? You're impatient. Okay. Thank you for being honest with us. Most people who say they're patient aren't really. That's the other thing we need to. I don't think I could describe myself as being especially patient myself. So 30 days, I mentioned that already. This is faster than most journals. But sometimes people say, you say that reviews are back after 30 days, I've waited 80 days. And I say, 30 days is an average. Sometimes it's quicker than that. But it depends on the review process, understandably. Okay, so what happens with the decision process? The first thing to be aware of, particularly early career researchers may not know this, reviewers send in 2 reports. They send in a report for the author, which would include advice on how to improve the article, but they also send separate advice to the editor. So sometimes the reviewer would say to me, I don't see how this article can be rescued, but I'm giving the author some advice just in case. So it's kind of saying to me, maybe not. And why could it not be rescued? One thing is because if the methodology is flawed, there is something wrong with the methodology, then you can't rescue that through rewriting the manuscript. Does that make sense? You can't rescue it. You could only rescue it by doing some more research. Do you see what I mean? It's going to be an issue here. So I had one recently, give you an example of someone who did a case study. Not from Turkey. A case study in which they'd interviewed 3 people for 30 minutes. And the judgment I made as desk reject was, the data is not substantial enough. 3 30-minute interviews from a single school, not enough. So it couldn't be rescued unless this person went away and did some more research. So that's why I said reject rather than major revision in that case. Okay, accept is very rare. I mentioned that already. The acceptance rate, when I prepared this, was 9.8%. It's dropped now to 9.5%. It's a dynamic situation with submissions and decisions being made. If you get a revision outcome, it's normal. Normal. Cheer, be happy and do it. Even if it seems like a lot to do, you are still in the game. Right? Not rejected, you're still in the game. And having to do it is normal. I have to do it. Sometimes it's frustrating, but that's the way it is. You have to do it. Okay. And then you need perseverance to resubmit. Don't retire. I'm very interested in sport, and sometimes in sport you get injured. You have to stop playing. Don't stop playing when it comes to journal submissions, right? Don't get all, my wonderful article's been told I've got to do major reviews. Kind of thing. Get on with it and do it. And in case of email, you have to do it within 3 months as well. If you don't submit within 3 months, you drop off the system, you don't exist anymore. Right? But if you ask nicely, before the 3 months, Louise will give you more time. But otherwise you can have articles that just live on the system forever. So we have to have some kind of time. 3 months is normally good enough. I've had one case recently with an author who's had a serious eye operation. Okay, so we've immediately given her more time. Because we're caring people, right? Is that right? Nobody seems to agree. All right, so revise, go ahead, revise. Don't drop. People do sometimes get a revision outcome and we never hear from them again. So don't be one of those people. Okay, what happens with the resubmissions? This is back to your important point about the covering letter. So we usually send the papers back to the same referees. Why do we do that, do you think? Why the same people? Why not try someone new? Why the same people?
Because they can clearly see they have corrected the mistakes that they, or fixed the parts that they need.
Absolutely correct. Well done, spot on. Continuity is the word we use. So when I'm reviewing for other journals, even for my own journal sometimes, what's the first thing I do when I receive a resubmission? If we've got some reviewers in the room, I'm interested to see what they do as well. What's the first thing I do when I receive a resubmission for a second review?
Go back to the previous one and check the points.
First thing I do is go back to the review I wrote before. Then, the second thing I do, this comes back to your point about the covering letter, is look at how the author has responded to those requirements in the letter. So those are the way. So then I'm focusing in my resubmission on those issues and not going back. I don't go back and go back to them and say, oh, I don't like X, Y, Z, even if I didn't say X, Y, Z last time. That doesn't help the author. So in that process, I may be satisfied with some of the changes, but not others, in which case it would go back to the author again, but then the author has less to do that time. But the clear thing is quality. It must reach the quality that's concerned. So you might do it a second time, a third time, a fourth time. Don't give up. That's the message you've got there. And I mentioned about needing to explain how you responded. You still get the same decision options. You could get an accept. You get a major revision, a minor revision, or you could still get a reject. Sometimes people would do it 3 times and still get a reject, and that's a hard letter for me to write. So I'm sorry, we don't see any prospect now of you being able to reach the standard required. You've had 3 tries. How many tries do you have, So in tennis, you're keen tennis players, you get 2 chances when you serve, right? Anyone play tennis? Nobody's not much people do sport around here. I asked about golf yesterday. Today, tennis, you get 2 chances to start the point off. And let's imagine you're a long jumper. Olympic Games this year, right? You get 3 chances in the long jump, you don't get them, you're out. Bang, bang, bang. So how many chances do we give before we say it's too late? Now, but do persevere requires resilience. Resilience is an interesting area of research in our field, actually, isn't it? What's that? The resilience shown by teachers and principals, for example. Okay, let's go on. Yes, please, of course you can. Good morning. Yeah.
If it's rejected after revision, you can resubmit again? Reject?
No, a reject is a reject. Then you have to go. It doesn't matter when it comes, it's still reject. Sorry. But of course you can then submit it somewhere else. That's the other thing.
Sometimes journal page, there is the writing option. If you send it before or not, there are options if you send it or not. I thought it is possible resubmit again.
Yes, so you're right to raise the question. So some journals have different decision options from mine, but we don't have those options here. But it's an interesting question that you've raised. So when you rejected, and in publishing, as in life, rejection can be hard to take. Am I right? Am I right? It can be hard to take. But you can submit somewhere else if you want to. That's not a problem to do that. Thank you for the question. So let's go on to some more basics now. So the title. Oh, so you want to ask the question first? Please go ahead. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning.
I want to ask you, as an editor, the writer made the corrections according to the review view.
Yeah.
But some of the corrections maybe it's not suitable for their article. So they wrote to the reviewer about this. Maybe they couldn't persuade the reviewer. Have you ever taken any initiative as an editor to make decision about the last decision?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's not quite the same issue that you're mentioning, but very similar. One of the challenges is, for authors, is if reviewer A says do this, and then reviewer B says do this, but you can't do both as an author. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear. Where the reviewers may seem to be contradictory. That's a big challenge for the author then. So sometimes they say to me, I don't know what to do, this reviewer wants me to do this, and this reviewer wants me to do this. And I'll say, write a letter, decide which one you want to do, write a letter, and then don't ignore the advice from the other person. Thank the reviewer for the advice and say you haven't gone ahead with it because it would contradict the advice you'd received from the other reviewer. That's you engaging. So that's what I would encourage you to do if you don't feel you can accept it. The point I made earlier is very important. It's your article. But you need to show respect to the reviewer, either by doing what he or she asks you to do, or by explaining why you haven't done it. Not just leaving it there. And usually the reviewer will think that's a fair enough answer. I understand. And still, then they won't pursue it. But sometimes it's more fundamental. So it's hard to speak generically about the issue that you're raising, but it is an important one. Hope that helps you. Anything else before I move on? Okay. Where am I? Oh, here we are. So title. I get some very bad titles. Oh dear. I don't know whether you do as well. What's that? Some people's titles are long enough to make up the 8,000 words for the article. Very long. Don't do that. And I'll give you some examples here. Make the titles very clear. You're trying to attract the editor and the reviewer to make them your friend. And from an editorial point of view, so when I receive articles in my mailbox from Louise, what's the first thing I look at? First impressions count. That's a great point. But what's the first thing I look at? Title. Title. So you see, look at the title, and you see, first of all, does it fit the scope? Back to the issue of scope that somebody raised a few minutes ago. Does it fit the scope? And is the title a good title? And what I expect people to include in their titles here are something about theory, something about context, and something about method. Now, dear Turkish authors, some of you, maybe not you, maybe people who are not here, will sometimes send me an article and the title doesn't include the word Turkey. It needs to include the word Turkey. You're trying to reach an international audience. Why is your work important? Because it's set in a particular context. So include the word Turkey. This is easy, isn't it? This is easy to do, very easy to do. Second thing is, so what is it about in terms of scope? So here are some examples I've given here. Of course, it doesn't have to be these. Here are examples of 3 things that fit the scope. If you write to me about those, it will fit the scope. There's lots of others. I'm just using these as examples. And these are popular topics that we receive. 2 very popular leadership models. I mentioned them yesterday, those of you who are here. And leadership preparation, increasingly important. How are leaders prepared for their roles? So you put that in the front. Then we have the issue of context. Now, Turkey is included, but notice the first one. It's not just Turkey, it's primary schools. So what you're doing there is making the context more specific. Yeah? So you're not talking about universities, you're not talking about secondary schools. You're being more specific than that in that particular case. And then, so the second one, provider and participant perspectives. So this is where the researcher is talking about method. In examining a leadership preparation program, they're interested in what the providers know and want to say, and also what the participants want to know and say. So one of my students in China, graduated now, did that topic in relation to leadership preparation in China. She's had several publications since. She's some with me, some by herself, some with other people. And after 3 years after her graduation, she is now an associate professor at a Chinese university. She's flying, as we say academically, flying. That's what I like my PhD students to do, is to fly. Okay? All right, so there's that there. Then the role of the principal. So these, what I'm very keen on, you don't have to do this. This is just my bias. But then if you think I might be reading it, you might want to know about my bias. I like the use of the punctuation here. This is what we call a colon. English language specialists, yes? Helps to divide the title. You have a prefix and you have a suffix. You don't have to do that. But you might like to know that I like it when I see titles like that. They're very clear. You see, they're very clear titles. They talk about theory, they talk about context, they talk about method. So they tick 1 box, 2 box, 3 box. So there's me telling you my secrets. Okay. So these are very important for discoverability. So getting known. How do you get known? So when you go into search engines, you're going to Google Scholar, or you're going to a university, a search engine, and because you want to find out about articles that are relevant to your research, then how do you do it? You might look for discoverability through the theme, distributed leadership. That will get you 1 million hits, right? But if you then put in "and Turkey," you will get a lot less. So discoverability is very important. Sometimes people will tell me what I call quirky titles, odd, strange titles, something that excites them. Don't do it. Discoverability, how are they going to know? How are you going to be famous? Yeah? You all want to be famous? Maybe not. Settle for a quiet life. But think about your titles very carefully. And similarly, we go on to this. Abstracts. The second thing we read as editors is the abstract. Now, some people write the abstract at the end, oh, I can't really be bothered. It's very important. Because the editor sees the abstract, and also when the invitation comes out, reviewers in the room will know this, when the invitation to review goes out, all the reviewer sees at that stage is title, abstract, and keywords. They don't see the text. Correct? Looking at my friends who spoke with me last night. Don't see the full text at that stage. So it's really important for the reviewer then to say yes or no to the invitation to review. Does this fit my research interest or not? So the abstract's very, very important. And mentioned gatekeepers already. So don't risk being rejected at the desk reject stage because you haven't bothered to do a proper abstract. And there is something else that irritates me. I mean, I'm a very calm person, obviously, you've seen that already, but email does not have structured abstracts. So when I see authors sending me a structured abstract, I think to myself, you know what? They're not thinking about where they're sending this article. Some journals like structured abstracts. For goodness sake, check whether the journal of your choice wants a structured abstract or not. Make the editor your friend. Okay? I don't have too many friends, so yeah, if there's any of you who want to be a friend, that's the way to do it. So there you go. And I don't like the structured abstract, I've said that already. So what do you include in there? What are the aims? And for goodness sake, tell me, oh, this is a bad one. Tell me the aims of your paper, not the aims of the research. Well, people say the aim of this research is. No. You're writing a paper. So you might say the aims of the article are to report the research of. See the difference? Yeah? Not the aims of the research are. Hope that makes sense. So don't do that. Okay, maximum 250 words for a map. Keywords, also very important. And that is also part of that opening that you have to do. Very important for discoverability. Mention theory and context. So if we take that first title that we had a little while ago, let me go back to it. If I can go back to it. So if we take that first title, Distributed Leadership in Turkish Primary Schools, a Multiple Case Study Approach, and we go forward. There we are. So keywords, distributed leadership, Turkey, primary schools, delegation, middle leaders. So keywords connect to the title. So someone who's interested in, shall we say, delegation, put delegation into a search engine, your article comes up. You don't put delegation in there, it doesn't come up. So you need to think carefully about what are the keywords. Normally we ask for 5. Doesn't matter if it's a bit less. That gives you an indication. So similar one here. So leadership preparation, Turkey, socialization and identity. Why? Because socialization and identity are 2 key concepts in understanding the transition from teacher to school principal. They go through a socialization process, change their identity. One day they wake up and they look in the mirror and they're different. Probably not appearing different, but they're a different person. You're doing something different. And that transition is quite difficult. I'm doing some work with colleagues in Sweden at the moment about that identity transition process. How does it work? How do you transition from I'm a classroom teacher to I'm a school principal? What kind of processes go on to help you to do that? Okay, then the third one, instructional leadership, Turkey, monitoring principles. So these are examples of appropriate keywords for those titles.
May I have a question?
Of course.
Are you sure technically it's a good strategy to repeat the title in the keywords because the search engines already search the title. So
make sense?
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that would be the argument for not doing what I'm talking about here. But of course, it's not just about the search engines. It's also about how the editor and the reviewers respond to the submission. So if you, I mean, if we follow your very wise point forward through, so if you take this one, so you wouldn't include any of these things. But what would you include? You might still have delegation and middle leaders in there because they're not in the title. But you'd lose the first three. I take the point. So it means that Turkey, for example, will come up twice. Distributed leadership will come up twice. Perhaps you and I need to have a coffee and talk about that, because I think it's a good point you're making, but I don't think the answer is completely straightforward.
Well, my graduation also
Is on computer, so I cannot, this kind of make sense. If you repeat the same again, search engines just overskip.
All right, okay. Oh, we do need to have a coffee then. Okay, very good point. Any more questions before we move along? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for your coming. I want to ask about your decision, first decision. You say title and abstract. First I read title and abstract. I decided to send reviewers or reject.
Yep.
I want to say title and keywords. We can change them. We can change title and keywords. Are they more important? I think aim, findings, and methodology. Maybe we can change these, but we can change keywords if you want. If you read and send back for resubmission. What do you think about it? Is it important, title and keyword?
You're asking a very good question, and thank you very much for it. So, why? So the challenge is this for the editor. So, we receive 700 submissions a year. We can save ourselves some time if we don't read the full manuscript of every article submitted. So sometimes it's very easy. I mentioned the engineering example earlier. I don't need to spend a long time deciding that that doesn't fit the scope of my journal. Do you see what I mean? So sometimes you can make that decision very quickly. If I was to read every article full right way through, I couldn't do my job. It's only part-time, remember? I work for a university, I work for 2 universities actually, and I'm president of WellMass. You just don't, you know, I've asked for more than 24 hours in a day and that was turned down. Right? So that's the challenge of doing it. I take the point about you could change the title, but what I would say to you back in here is make your title appropriate the first time around. First impressions, right? Didn't count. But that's a good question. Perhaps we could talk about it afterwards. But it's an interesting issue around so I do sometimes read the whole article before I say desk reject. Because I go through the abstract and the keywords and the title, well, this might fit. And then, for example, I will look closely at method. The other thing I do, I feel very, this is a guide for you who might want to submit to email. If you don't have appropriate referencing, that's a big problem, so I look at that. So, for example, if I'm looking at, let's say, transformational leadership, this is a common one. Somebody yesterday sitting over here, when I asked about what's the most important model, said transformational leadership. So if I see transformational leadership being discussed, think, okay, that's potentially relevant here to this, and I'll read through. But if their references are all taken from general business transformational leadership and not education, goodbye. I won't do that. So everybody wants to talk about Bass and Burns and the other writers. These are important writers, I don't discount them. But their context is not education. And these same people are ignoring Ken Leithwood, who's written extensively about transformational leadership in education. Scholars should know that. If they don't, start reading. So I do sometimes do that. And I want to say something else to you, dear Turkish scholars, and I've said this to one or two people already. Do you think when writing your references, you should write them in English or Turkish? submitting to my journal? Must be in English. But I lose count of the number of Turkish scholars who think it's okay to send articles to my journal, an international journal with international readership, with untranslated Turkish language references. They are rejected. Think about your audience. If you want to interest people who only read Turkish, send to a Turkish language journal. You get cross-checked. You're submitting to a top-ranked Q1 international journal, and you can't be bothered to translate your Turkish language references. Is my message loud and clear? Please don't do it. It happens a lot. Not just occasionally, it happens a lot. So always have in mind the audience. Who am I writing for? It's too easy to think, oh, I'm writing so I can get promotion. Never mind that. Who are you writing this article for? Who's going to read it? Are you not interested in the number of downloads your article gets? All that information is available. Are you not interested in the citations? That is, other scholars citing your work? These are indicators of high standing. So do the basics. Please? Have I said it too much? You see, I get crossed out a little bit. Okay, let's go on. So, preparing a journal article. I know some of you are thinking about this, some have already started doing it. So, if you're thinking about email, 8,000 words maximum. So again, this is basic, probably you all know this. Do an outline with structure and with word allocation for each section. Don't do what weaker authors do. Oh, here is an 8,000 word article, starting with a 5,000 words introduction. Doesn't happen that often, but you know, it's just sort of basic. Think about the shape. You learned this in primary school, right? How to structure something. So it's really very important. Then think about the audience. Who would want to read the article? Why would anyone, this is being very negative now, why would anyone want to read your article? Because it's got something new and powerful to say that's of global interest. Turkey is an important country in this field as well. People want to know what's happening in relation to different aspects of educational administration in this context. So share that with them. Why would they want to read it? So it helps you to get past the editor and the reviewers, then on to readers. Sense of audience. Very, very important. Who am I writing this for? Engage the audience. Make us all your friends. And then you become famous. Okay, so the other thing is, so what sort of articles might we accept? So obviously we consider empirical articles that are reporting research that you may have carried out, for perhaps for your doctorate or for a master's thesis or some other form of research that you've been involved in. Very good, very important, and the great thing about empirical work is giving new findings, new data. And if it's presented properly, that's of interest to the audience. It's important, as I say, to publish such findings, but with very careful explanation of method. I say to my own students, they love me for this, as you can imagine, think 3 questions when you're writing about method. What did you do? How did you do it? Why did you do it that way? What, how, why? Describe, explain, and justify. Yeah? Yes, you can see how easy it is to be a PhD student of mine, right? No problems. Very straightforward. No issue. Now, another approach that we've had more of recently is systematic literature reviews, where people have looked at the whole of the field, defined in a particular way, and produced papers. So I've got one, many of you in the room will know Sedat Gümes, who's a Turkish scholar who's now working in Hong Kong, who submitted a systematic review to my journal recently. It's under review now. It can be very important because it helps the scholar, because they have a starting point for their own literature reviews. Someone's done the job for them, right? It's a very important start, and it helps to provide an overview of the field. So we quite like those. They're often very well cited as well. Of course, they have to be well written, obviously, and the process needs to be explained. So what were your inclusion criteria? What were your exits? So how did you decide what to include in the review, what not to include? So you might do that by date. For example, new millennium only, or 2010 on, you might do it that way. Or you might do it by context. This is a review of Turkey only. Or it's a review of a defined region, for example, the Gulf region, for example, where there's several countries. Or Europe. I mean, it could be any defined context, but that all needs to be explained. So those inclusion-exclusion criteria are your equivalent of explaining method. Equivalent of doing that if you're doing empirical work. So you like that well. And what I would encourage people to do, if you're a less experienced author, is write cooperatively with somebody who has experience, who knows the game. So the way I work with my own PhD students, we write an article at the beginning, 2 of us student name first. Second time, I give them informal advice, their name only. Third time round, they fly. But the starting point is quite important. There's something else I think we should think about, less experienced scholars. If you submit your article as a new researcher, unknown to the world of publishing, how will the editor respond to you? The reviewer won't know who you are, but the editor does. Now, should that matter? How do we handle the ethics of that? Coxall is not a straightforward issue. Does it matter? If you partner with someone who's very well known, maybe that just increases the chance of you avoiding a desk reject. Shouldn't, not in mine. So something to think about as you develop your own individual reputation. Okay, how are we doing? Already too late. Conclusion then. And then forgive me if I'm holding you up for getting too much. Okay, so this is, what are we looking for? Very high technical quality. And I do understand the challenges of being a second language writer. And the great majority of articles submitted to email are from people who are second language speakers. Some of them very good indeed, but they're still second language speakers. So get advice. We're not going to say, oh, this manuscript's really poor technically, but they're second language speakers, so we still accept it. We're not going to do that. Because we care about the reputation of the journal. So take advice. Clearly explain the purpose of the paper. What is it about and why? Do a sound review of previous research and literature, careful explanation of methods. I've touched on this already. Clear presentation and discussion of findings. And here I have to say something, I mentioned this to colleagues already. There's quite a strong quantitative tradition in Turkey in relation to scholars in this field. That's fine. We consider quantitative studies alongside qualitative studies. But then you must explain very carefully. Some Turkish scholars do really quite intricate and detailed statistical analysis of their data. Inferential statistics, we would call it. And they don't explain what that means in words. So if you're an international reader, for example, a school principal, a policy maker, or a qualitative researcher, you cannot access the findings. Don't do it. Don't assume that everybody has the same high level of statistical capability as you have. They'll be sent back. You have to make the writing accessible. It's all right to present the findings, but then be very careful about explaining them in a way that a lay reader would understand. And particularly for Belmas journals, this email is owned by the British Educational Leadership Management and Administration Society. Hundreds of members. If you haven't joined yet, sign up. Right? We have policymakers, we have principals, we have NGOs, we have qualitative researchers, we have PhD students, and of course we have established quantitative researchers. Reach them all. They get free access to the map and the Earth Journal. So reach them all. It's another one of my little complaints about some Turkish scholars, but intended to be creative, constructive and helpful to people. Okay, prepare several drafts, I mentioned that already. Do not submit your own personal first draft. That's a very high risk strategy. Ask advice from an experienced author. Okay, I've overrun my time. I do apologise. It was all your fault for asking difficult questions. Nothing to do with me. No, not at all. I'm only joking. So thank you very much for being here. It's been a nice audience. And I think probably I should let you go for lunch. But if anybody wants to stay to talk to me, I'm still here. That's absolutely fine. So thank you. And I think we can wrap up then. Yes, thank you.
I wonder, artificial intelligence about publishing process. Should we use it, or is it ethics?
So I'm sorry, do you mean writing an article about artificial intelligence, or do you mean using artificial intelligence to help you write the article?
Maybe using a translation process, or
I think I can answer what you said so far while you're thinking. Translation is okay, but
our article, or do you use it as editor?
no. And I would discourage authors from using it as well. I think we can see when people have drawn on that, because it has a particular format. So,
for example, I use it, should I declare it as ethics process?
we don't ask people to declare. We don't ask people to declare. You do have to sign it's your own work. You do have to say it's your own work. So this is a rapidly changing field, isn't it? And it's a very good question that you're asking me. It is something we'll be talking about at the editorial board meeting in London on Tuesday, when I meet the rest of our team about the issue of that. And so, but my university, for example, has very sophisticated software now that sees that coming. So, and Sage also has very sophisticated software. So what we're looking at is for people not to use artificial intelligence to write their papers. What I thought you were asking when you started the question was, can you write an article about artificial intelligence and its role in leadership? And it's possible, but it would have to be focused on the education context. But using artificial intelligence to write the article, that wouldn't be accepted. So, and we would know. We have software that would pick that up. So, you also mentioned translation. Yes, of course you can use translation tools like Google Translate, for example, if you want to do a draft in Turkish and then transfer it to English. But remember, the translation process is not perfect at the academic level. It's a useful starting point, but it's not perfect. It's helpful for people like me, you know, who are just coming brand new to Turkey. What does that mean? I don't need to do that, but for the kind of level required for a top-level journal, that wouldn't work. Very good question, though. Roxanne. So, Roxanne first, or are you going to let the lady go? Ladies first, that's what we say.
I want to ask about findings, results. When you review an article abstract, and you see the findings. For example, the article is about a correlational paper, relationship paper.
Right.
There are 3 or more variables, and there are no relationship behind between variables, or lower the relationship between variables. What do you think? You want to see a high relationship between variables, or is it important about your decision? For decision, it's important in correlational essays, in correlational articles.
Well, we first wanted to report the relationship accurately. That's the first thing. Whether it's high or low is not. It may have an impact on the significance of the paper. But the first thing is to report it accurately. The second thing refers to what I said earlier, to make sure that the discussion and the explanation are accessible to people who don't understand correlation work. Don't think that your only readers are people who are interested in the same method as yourself. But there wouldn't be a desk reject decision on the level. It may be something that reviewers comment on, in which case that might lead to an outcome for the author. But it wouldn't be a source for a desk reject. I don't think I've ever done that. So can't think of an example of me doing that. But I do encourage you to think, as I've mentioned earlier, about, so how would a policymaker understand what I'm writing about? What can I say to help that understanding level for a policymaker or a school principal or someone who's doesn't have your level of expertise in statistics?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Ladies first.
There are a lot of ladies in the room, Coxside. You could have a long wait here. Yes, sorry, please, what would you like to say?
About AI, can you detect AI users in their work?
Sage can. So Sage is the publisher of the journal. So Sage has software. So if we're a little bit suspicious about it, we'll send it to the Sage experts. It's quite a new phenomenon, so we haven't got a lot of experience in this at the moment. But that's why it's on the agenda for my editorial board to think about.
Because the AI is like cheating.
Yeah, it's a form of teaching. Cheating. I understand that, and the important thing here is the ethical aspect. You have to declare when you submit that it's your own work. So if you are sending in an AI paper, it's not your own work anymore, and you are telling lies. You are telling lies to the editor. So I think it's an important issue, and it's a complex one. I think it finally comes to you.
I have 2 questions. First one, I have recently read critical piece on academic title in scholarly journals, and the authors criticize that global North journals demands authors to specify context in terms of geographical place, but they do not. Global North authors on themselves, they do not specify their own context, especially American scholars. What do you think about this one? The first question.
Can I answer that one first? Do you mind? And then come back to the second one. And have we any Americans in the room? Do apologise to any Americans for what I'm about to say. American scholars have a very large domestic market, 350 million people. And when I mentioned sensible audience earlier, they are addressing an American audience even if they send it to an international journal, and they assume that everybody knows that it's about America. So I do think that's a challenge. I'm less conscious of that in terms of people from particular countries in other countries, but it is a big issue there. And I did have an argument once with somebody senior scholar from the US, not really an argument, a debate, who was claiming that his organisation was now totally international. I said, give me an example. He said, we include Toronto. Now, those of you familiar with North American geography know that Toronto's pretty close to the US, right? So we include Toronto, so we're now international. Doesn't meet my definition at all. But I think it's important for my journal, if you don't specify the context, expect it to come back to you. Second question.
The second one, indeed, I forgot, sorry.
Sorry?
Yeah, the editors are very famous about, narrowing the scope. Indeed, bad famous.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I realize that also we editors have chance to widen the scope.
Yeah.
For example, a few months ago, we received an article on student leadership from Canada. And when I checked our reviewers in the system, I sent the article to one very famous reviewer from Canada.
Yep.
And he said, no, because this is not in the, this text editor is not the educational administration. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I began to think about this process in gatekeeping. When we accept any article, for example, on students' leadership, in 2 or 3 months, many other articles came in the system with the same topic, student leadership. What do you think about this process, narrowing and versus widening the scope as an editor?
It's another very good question, and I understand where the Canadian reviewer is coming from doing that. So I think we have to go back. I can do this because I'm older than I look. Right? Okay, don't tell me I look old as well. So if we think about the founding stages of the field of education administration, with its various names that we have now, it was defined in terms of the professionals who work in schools. That was the starting point. So what do we mean by the professionals? Teachers and school leaders. That was how it was defined. Actually, and increasingly in those days, also what I call system leaders, people who work in districts and provinces. I've met 1 or 2 people in those situations since I've been here. So that was the definitional point. So the interesting question now, and I've also had submissions about student leadership, maybe from the same people, I don't know. And we've tended not to accept them. And that's partly because of the need to narrow, because of the scale of the response that we're getting from people. How do we narrow? If I accept a student leadership paper, I'm not accepting one on teacher leadership, for example. That's some other aspect of leadership. But there is an interesting issue about, so for example, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've published several papers about leadership during COVID-19. Of course, that was never in the scope, of course, but it was the decisions we made to publish those papers as a recognition of its worldwide significance, that whole issue. We published many important papers, so have other journals, of course. So that's a way in which we would take a more elastic approach, flexible approach. Here's a major issue that's of interest, and I think I mentioned yesterday my student is looking at leadership in early childhood education in Indonesia, who went there as good PhD students do, with an interview guide linked to the research questions. And all the people wanted to talk about was leadership in COVID-19. So he actually changed his approach, added a research question. And he kept saying to me, because he was there and I was here, is it okay for me to do this? My answer to it, and for those of you who are qualitative scholars, if you're a qualitative researcher, you co-construct that conversation with the participant. You don't say to them, I don't want to talk to you about COVID-19. Co-construct that conversation. So the participant owns the conversation as much as you do. And that, so I said to him, yes, it's okay. He's passed his FIFA now and he's now a doctor, Johan. So I think that's a different issue. Student leadership, I've still not, when I'm thinking about the issue, before coming here and prompted by you, still not entirely sure that we're defining it right as outside the scope or not outside the scope. But that was the starting point. We go back to when the field started. So BELMAS, for example, my professional association, was founded in 1972. My predecessor as president of BELMAS, Professor Ron Blatter, was the very first secretary of BELMAS. He's about to have his 85th birthday. Still in good shape, still very good shape. Thanks, great question, Consol. So people, if you want to go for lunch, please go for lunch. Don't feel you have to sit here. If you want to ask more questions, that's fine. If you want to talk to me on an individual basis, that's also fine. But thank you for your participation and your interesting questions. Good luck with your publishing careers. All of you.
Education and family photo time, so don't leave yet. We would like to thank Professor Tony Bush for coming here and his great contributions to us. It's been a great privilege and honor to have you here with us. Thank you. Dr. Gülten Türkan Gürer will be offering you this certificate of appreciation